Our population of people over the age of 64 has really skyrocketed. It used to be that once you hit a certain age, your health declined and you didn't live much longer. Thanks in probably large part to the health industry, modern medicine, we now have a much larger population of folks that are 65 and older. And we'll look at definitely some of the reasons and some of the reasons for this shift as we go through the slides. This is figure 14.2 in your book. Basically, India's population still looks like a pyramid, but you can see within the past few years, the demographic shift has begun. There are fewer children under age 5 than in the 3 higher age groups. So we're losing that replacement rate you can see from the last slide. This is how we tend to classify folks in the 65 and older category. They can be young old, old, or the oldest old. Young old are going to be folks that you see out active, maybe still working, healthy, still really living their best life. Old, they are still able to care for themselves, but it becomes a little harder. They may get out here and there, but largely, maybe you see declines in their mental health, maybe you start to see declines in their physical health. And then the oldest old are typically dependent on someone else. So you may see these may be folks that are completely dependent on another person. Maybe they're in a nursing home, or just they need someone else to take care of them at the state that they're in. Wear and tear theory is this view of aging as a process by which the human body wears out because of the passage of time and exposure to environmental stressors. The Hayflick limit in cellular aging theory is the number of times a human cell is capable of dividing into 2 new cells. The limit for most human cells is approximately 50 cell divisions, an indication that the lifespan is limited by our genetic makeup. Telomeres is this area on the tip of each chromosome. It looks like the little plastic piece that's keeping your shoelace together. It's kind of the same idea, and it's reduced. Telomere length is reduced a tiny amount as time passes. It also is reduced due to certain traumatic events and other things that people kind of go through. Generally, by the end of life, telomeres are very short. We do have a maximum lifespan. I think the current estimates are that it's about 115 years old. I think the world's oldest person just died at 114 years old, so really not too far off from that. And we see this number, it does continue, it does kind of change as I think medicine improves, but also I've actually recently heard a podcast where the guest was saying that he was determined to live to 180 and he feels like he has the tools to do that. So he has a certain workout regimen and a certain eating regimen, and he takes just a terrible amount of pills, which I think are ultimately vitamins or something. Anyhow, he's certainly trying to expand and increase the maximum lifespan. He was pretty confident that he would live to 180. But yeah, okay, so we could talk more about that later if it comes up. But basically, we do see cognitive decline once people get a little bit older, and that's really traced back to 3 diseases or so. We have Alzheimer's, vascular disease, and Lewy body disease, where we see the most cognitive declines in older age. Ageism is a form of stereotyping and discrimination for people of a certain age. You see examples of ageism if someone gets laid off because of their age, if they're refused the same quality of service as maybe younger patrons, because typically in your history you've seen that older people maybe tip less, so why waste your time? You see people discriminating if older people listen to a type of music. You're like, that's not your music, why are you listening to that? I had that problem recently. My grandfather asked me, he's in his mid 70s, he asked me if I had heard a song, and I had not heard of the song. And I was like, no. He's like, oh, let me find it for you and play it for you. It is so catchy. And I was like, oh, okay. And he played it for me, and it was very current hip hop. Definitely something he's heard probably from my niece or nephew being over at his house. And he was singing right along to it. And I thought, this is so weird. But again, that's really a type of ageism on my part. I really need to rein that in. He's trying to find ways to connect with the younger crowd. And I think that is really sweet. Ageism can be harmful when we treat older adults as if they cannot take care of themselves or as more frail than they actually are. They still are looking for autonomy and independence and control over their life. And we have to respect that to the degree that they are able to still take care of themselves. My great grandma was still driving and living on her own at 99 years old, which is crazy to me. But she was able to do it, and fought, moving into a nursing home because she felt like she needed to be in control of her life still. Certainly, sleep becomes less in older adults. Also, exercise ticks down in older adulthood. Most exercise classes are typically designed for young people. So it's really important and I think healthy for older adults to be able to find a class or find a group or find some friends that they can walk with or talk with or do yoga with. I used to go to a yoga class on Tuesday mornings because I didn't have work that early on Tuesdays. And the whole class, I was the only person easily under probably 80. And it was it was really fun to see their camaraderie and their enjoyment. You could tell that it was more than just staying active for them. They really were looking for that time to bond and have a connection with other people. And that's so important no matter what age we are. You can see here most of the older adults do not meet the minimum exercise standards recommended by the CDC. 150 minutes of aerobic exercise a week and muscle strengthening exercises twice a week. This is especially troubling since those activities have been proven many times to safeguard the health of all the major organs, as well as to correlate with intelligence, memory, and joy. Elder speak is not really dissimilar to mother ease that we talked about when we were talking about babies. It's a really this long drawn out, how are you doing today, grandma? And just really talking to them as if they, well, one, can't hear you, but if also talking as if they might not know the answer. You maybe will give them the answer or give them emphasize something that you want them to hear. There's just a different way that we talk to older people, particularly when we feel that they maybe aren't understanding as well as they used to. And this is another form of really prejudice as well. Most people are sexually active throughout adulthood. Some continue to have intercourse long past age 65, but generally intercourse becomes less frequent. Sometimes it stops completely, but not often. And sexual satisfaction, as I've already mentioned, does increase after middle age. If you've ever worked at a nursing home or known people at nursing homes, there's a lot of really interesting facts there. STDs are a really big problem. There's a lot of sex happening in nursing homes with consensual, usually, generally. It's a really interesting line of research. If you haven't seen it, you're welcome to look into it if it interests you. Grounded theory is a form of qualitative research. Basically, you go in and ask the person questions related to your research question, and then they give you a sentence or a paragraph or a conversation about their experience, and then the researcher goes in and looks for themes and different ideas around that. So basically what this research has found is that obviously sexual needs and interactions do vary from person to person, and I think that goes throughout the lifespan as well. It's not limited to older adults. And then there are certain ways that older adults compensate for their physical changes by optimizing their relationship in other ways, as you can see here. As I mentioned a few slides ago, my 99-year-old grandma was still driving, and here are some of the reasons why she probably should not have been driving. These things become more difficult as we get older. I'm already noticing in my 30s that it's harder to drive at night because of changes in my vision. My grandma in her 70s hasn't driven in years. She likes to be the passenger, so people drive her around everywhere. But generally, they're trying to pass some legislation that increases maybe test taking for your driver's license renewal. So instead of taking the test once when you're 16 and then just repeatedly getting your driver's license renewed, okay, maybe we should reevaluate and have you start taking the test every year and do that vision test every year, and just at a more frequent pace than what other adults have to do. So, and we do see there's probably a lot of benefit to that in the long run, but people are slow to make legislative change on that because you're putting a stigma, you're really showcasing that ageism and that we can't trust these people and it takes away their autonomy. So there's a lot of hesitation moving forward in some of those, but certainly we're trying to be sensitive to their autonomy while still making sure it's safe for them to be out on the road. These photographs depict the same scene, and then you can see variation depending on how a person would perceive it with a few different disorders. So the top left picture, picture A, is what the scene would look like for someone with normal vision. Picture B on the top right would be someone with cataracts. Picture C on the bottom left, someone with glaucoma. And picture D on the bottom right would be someone with macular degeneration. As people get older, their hearing tends to start to go out, similar to vision, similar to all the other senses that we mentioned. And hearing aids are accessible, but I'll tell you, they do hesitate because it feels like, well, I'll give you an example. My grandma, who's in her 70s, has been missing out on conversation for years. Finally is convinced to get hearing aids. She got them a couple months ago, maybe. And she wore them for a few days. I asked her how she liked them, and she said she hated them. And I said, tell me about that. And they basically, she's now hearing conversation with the person who's directly having a conversation with her. She's also hearing the TV. She's hearing other conversations across the room. It's like a sensory overload at this point. And so she really didn't care for that. And so I don't even think she made it a week before she threw them out. Well, I think she still has them, but she doesn't wear them. She took them out of her ears and she's not wearing them. So she'd prefer to miss out on the conversation than be overwhelmed by conversations that she didn't even know were happening. Universal design is really just creating physical settings, creating settings, creating equipment that can be used by everyone, regardless if they're able-bodied or sensory acute. Specifically with physical settings, we've definitely come a long way with newer buildings, but there's still many, many old buildings that aren't physically sensitive to universal design. We're also working, and I think we'll see an improvement over the next, decade or so, in getting websites and different electronic resources to be of a more universal design. It's another one of those things where if you don't say something, if we can't fix something that we don't know is a problem. So as we've realized problems and people have spoken up, we're really starting to be able to be more sensitive to those types of issues and challenges. We already mentioned that even across the lifespan, really, we are our brain is still developing. We're getting new dendrites as we learn new things. And of course, new dendrites can lead to new ideas. This here in the picture is Albert Bandura. He's the one who developed social learning theory to explain why the preschoolers attacked the Bobo doll with a hammer. He's sitting here at age 90 signing copies of a book that explains his theory of moral disengagement in these hopes that we can develop a more compassionate and humane society. We did mention the brain starting to slow down. I think it really starts to tick off after about age 30, but it's a very slow decline, and then it definitely picks up once we hit older adulthood. Brain speed is crucial for many aspects of cognition. For example, memory, sensation, perception, and strategy. A team of neuroscientists in Scotland published these images of the brains of healthy 65 and 70-year-olds. The images show normal brain loss, which are the white areas, from the lowest, which was the 5th percentile, to the highest, which is the 95th percentile. Some atrophy is inevitable. Even younger brains atrophy, but few elders are merely average. The brain automatically fills in missed sights and sounds. Most older people believe that they see and hear whatever is important, but vital information may be distorted or lost without the person even realizing. Elderly people's underlying problem with sensory input may be the brain, so the input is not processed correctly, or in the senses, where the input just never reaches the brain, or it could be a combination of the two. Ecological validity is just this idea that cognition should be measured in natural settings and schedules rather than in a lab on predetermined tests. Most elderly people never experience a major neurocognitive disorder. Among people in their 70s, only one person in 20 does, and most of those who reach 90 or 100 do not suffer significant cognitive decline. Presented another way, the prevalence data sound more dire. Almost 4 million people in the US have a major neurocognitive disorder. 14% of the elders had some form of neurocognitive disorder. Extrapolated to the overall population, that means that about 4 million US residents have a serious neurocognitive disorder. More prevalent in low income nations, it will improve with better education and public health. Forgetfulness is a dominant symptom of Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is partly genetic. If it develops in middle age, the affected person either has trisomy 21, so Down syndrome, or has inherited one of 3 genes: amyloid precursor protein, presenilin 1, or presenilin 2. For these people, the disease progresses quickly, reaching the last phase within 3 to 5 years. Most cases begin much later, at age 75 or so. Many genes have some impact, including SORL1 and APOE4, which is the allele 4 of the APOE gene. People who inherit one copy of APOE4, as about 1/5 of all US residents do, have about a 50-50 chance of developing Alzheimer's disease. Those who inherit 2 copies almost always develop the disorder if they live long enough. This is the brain of a person with Alzheimer's. You can see table 14.2 in your book for additional information on the stages of Alzheimer's disease. This computer graphic shows a vertical slice through a brain ravaged by Alzheimer's disease on the left, compared with a similar slice of a normal brain on the right. The diseased brain is shrunken because neurons have degenerated. The red indicates plaques and tangles. Polypharmacy is a situation in which elderly people are prescribed several medications. The various side effects and interactions of those medications can result in dementia symptoms.